It's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, welcome back to Who Got the Assist in the aftermath of the second weekend of the 2023-2024 season. Looking ahead to game week 3 here. I'm Tom, I'm here with a beer as usual. I'm ready to chew through the first X versus Y of the season, I think, for us in many ways. So we'll come on to that and contemplate in just a bit. Joined by Sam, as always. You all right?
Yeah, all good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I'm all right. Yeah, just had a fairly fun weekend. Went to a friend's barbecue and went to see some of my other half's friends as well. So my little girl met loads of new people, and she was very, very excited, which is quite good. Although on Sunday she was very tired as a result of having a very, very energetic Saturday. This is my life now, Sam. This is my life.
Yeah.
Just
I always realise you always ask me what I've been up to this weekend, so I thought I'd throw it back at you today because the listeners never get to hear what you're up to. So that's a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of Tom's life for you all. Mine was a little bit of drinking, so my throat is a little bit sore. I did tell Tom I think it's because of the shouting over all the loud music. How old am I? But yeah, if I start coughing at any point, I do apologize. I'll try and mute myself if that does happen. But in the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. We'll skip the longer intro today and go straight to the mini league code, which if you're not in already, we'll close it off in a couple of weeks, but there is still time to get into the mini league now. That code is MINLUD. So do make sure you are registered to that before we shut it off in a couple of weeks' time. On today's pod, we're, as Tom mentioned, going to have our first X versus Y of the season, which could be really interesting. We've got Contemplate to come, which will really delve into that question for the start. Try to assess whether we jump on the emerging bandwagons after a couple of weeks, and going into a bit of detail if we have in fact seen enough after just 2 weeks of data, or whether we want a little bit longer before making wholesale changes to our teams. Bold claims as well. I think we're looking at potentially another 3 strikeouts this week. So we've got 2 fresh bold claims for you all today, and then we'll be posing the question to you all for your bold claims for game week 3. And then we've got quite a few listener questions to go through as well. So we'll try to fit in as many, if not all of them, if we can, towards the end of the pod. Obviously, we'll take a look at our teams as well and how we're setting up ahead of game week 3, because I think I'm right in saying we've got 2 free transfers each. So plenty of mistakes that we can both make.
Yes, that's perfect. And it's also, as with last week, we're recording in the second half of the final game of the game week. Arsenal versus Palace is playing in the background. It's Monday, 21st of August, in case you're listening to this in the future and they're saying, why are those guys pushing in Buemo? He's just done his cruise ship. Hopefully he doesn't. Please don't do a cruise ship, Brian. I don't want to jinx you or anything like that. Right. So, I mean, scores on the doors for this game week, Sam. It's not been the most fantastic of game weeks after a really good one last week, but I think the teams are still set up very well. I think the biggest kind of talking point, I'm not going to go for our entire teams here, so we spoke about them last week as well. I love how last week the main sort of thing we were talking about on WhatsApp and things and agonizing about was Turner versus Onana. It was just totally irrelevant.
Yeah, it has been quite funny to watch. After the first game, like obviously an absolute thunder bastard to break the clean sheet for Turner. So can't really complain about that. I thought generally they look pretty good. But yeah, you can't really complain when something like that goes in. But yeah, as soon as that happened, it looked almost written that Turner and Onana would end up on the same amount of points, making no difference to our sides whatsoever. So all of that agonizing over the whole week meant absolutely nothing to us. I don't think many keepers have kept clean sheets, unless you're an Edison owner, obviously, this week. Yep. So it's all very nonsensical, really, all of that debating that we did. So we're both currently, well, until the Arsenal game kicked off, these screenshots are a little bit old without the Arsenal players added in. We were both on 38 points, which means we're both on exactly the same game week rank and on the season rank as well, because we started off the season on the same amount of points as well. So 38 points each, not accounting for the Arsenal players. As it stands, it's 0-0 after 51 minutes. So hopefully clean sheet points come in soon because we're both Saliba owners. But we're waiting for that Martinelli hat trick to come any minute now. It's looking less and less likely, but we live in hope.
I think the only thing to kind of remark on here for me, we both own Estepinian and Matoma. Matoma's got a goal and assist, and but both we also had Estepinian in. But remember, we were saying last week about, oh my, at the very very end, we were just flipping around, flip flopping everywhere, and Matoma somehow ended up in our team. And last week we were like, oh, Joao Pedro 7, Matoma with 5, we're down there. And then this week the turns tabled very very abruptly on the poor Joao Pedro owners of 0 points versus Matoma getting a 12. So I think that's probably just one thing to remark on. And obviously United guys both blanked, which is going to come up in Contemplate, which I suppose we'll speak about now, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll skip straight through the other team because it's almost identical. Obviously, Turner for Onana. We both picked the other way from each other. But yeah, we're on the same game week rank and the same season rank, which is about 700k, I think. So moving on to Contemplate. And the headline act today is Brian Mbeumo scored 2 goals over the weekend, obviously one of which was a penalty, but did look fantastic value for money yet again. I think he's still at 6.6 million. So he's had one price rise, but the bandwagon hasn't completely set off and the train isn't out of the station yet. So there's still time to hop on him if you've got that little bit in the bank from 6.5 million as well, such as Mitoma, like we both have in our team. So there's plenty to debate there. And of course, the Man United assets that a lot of us do have. A lot of us have at least one. Quite a few of us have Bruno to accompany Rashford as well, both failing to give us anything to be inspired by yet again. And I think this performance, even more so than the opening day performance, was pretty disheartening for any owners out there, especially with just one game week left of their good opening run. Is it time to have a look elsewhere? Could we be looking at Brian Mbeumo, or perhaps are there other assets to take a look at to replace those faltering Man United boys?
Certainly. I mean, should we start with the players going out first? So there's a couple of options, I think, kind of in the template, the pro template, which is the key one being Mbeumo in. Almost 400,000 transfers in for Mbeumo at the moment. Set to rise even further. Arsenal just scored. So I think it might have been Saka penalty. Seamless. Okay. Take it in my stride. Continue. But removing United players is interesting. So Nathan Jacobson, for example, asked us, do I remove Rashford, who's got terrible form but still has a good fixture remaining, as Sam just touched on there? It's interesting because I think there were quite a few of us who started with a couple of Man United players, including both of us, so Bruno and Rashford. And weighing up which one to remove is quite interesting. I think it was on Saturday night, people were kind of saying, I'm removing Bruno now for Mbeumo. I've had enough. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's an interesting one, because Bruno, second for XGI so far, 2.2, only 2 games I know. But the last game, the Spurs game, over 1.5 XGI, 1 point.
That header, I don't know how he missed it so badly, but yeah, that's got to account for a lot of that, surely.
And Anthony hit the post from another kind of ball through, and not
true.
A through ball, but one. So, I mean, if he'd have scored, I think that was a pen shout as well, wasn't it? The Romero handball. So if we'd have scored that, it was something you wouldn't really have a decision about it. Rashford at 0.89 XGI so far this season. And trying to weigh up which one to sell is quite an interesting question, because you got XGI, lower EO. I know some people don't care about it, but I kind of do. So lower EO, so he constitute, quote unquote, the safer sale if you are going to go down that way. Whereas Rashford, if he's playing as number 9, we've spoken about it a fair bit, but it's a case of killing 2 birds with killing one stone with 2 birds, actually. But so ineffectual up top, and United simultaneously robbed themselves of one of the most potent attacking weapons. So I mean, if a nobody like me can see that, surely ETH can, and surely we'll be looking at maybe Sancho or Martial starting, as I said, Sam. And if that happened, and I'd sold Rashford, and suddenly he's starting on the left against Forest, I'm going to be really worried. So it's a tough one to weigh up, really, in terms of those two. Certainly have really, really disappointed us over the last couple of weeks, but with Bruno particularly, it's not for want of trying.
Yeah, I think if you take EO out of it to start with, based on what we've seen on the pitch so far, Bruno is the easier hold. He's cheaper, he's on pens, and he looks the creative outlet at the moment. He has been unlucky not to return as well, as you've already mentioned with the underlying data. I think with Rashford, because it's that fear of EO, but it's also the fact that all it takes is one decision from Ten Hag, and all of a sudden he is a fantastic pick again. I still can't believe that Sancho didn't play the false nine at some point. Well, from the start, even over the weekend. During the week, we were both pretty convinced that that would be the way they set up. Obviously, the weekend prior, it didn't look very convincing with him in the number 9, so you would have thought he would shift over to the left. However, obviously playing him through the middle again wasn't that effective. Against Forest, it's going to be a low block as well, you'd imagine, and Forest have actually performed really well in terms of the underlying data so far. Obviously, they got the win at the weekend, and like I mentioned, it was basically one shot on target, one goal from outside the box, an absolutely beautiful strike that there's not really much saving those, and there's not really much any team can do about those. And then obviously in the first game of the season, they kept Arsenal to under 1 XG as well. So maybe this is a team that they're going up against that isn't actually that bad or that much of a team to target at the moment. So there is definitely an argument to sell one of these boys. It's which one would you prioritize selling? And then are you confident enough on the player you're buying to prioritize doing that this week when actually there might be moves elsewhere? And of course, they can, because they're elite players, they can return any week. The effective ownership of Rashford is high, so there is something to be a little bit fearful of there. And Bruno's underlying data is still fantastic. So it feels like it's a bit of a ketchup bottle thing going on with him at the moment. All it takes is one, and he could be on max bonus, penalty, assist, and all of a sudden you're looking at a 15-pointer.
It's filling me with fear.
Yeah.
You always create that sort of story, don't you? And you touched on it there, talking about Forest, that, yeah, you know, they restricted the teams they played against, especially away. And you've had that sort of, I don't know, I've been backing United players in FPL for years at home and just watched them really struggle against the low block. And that's precisely what Forest are going to do. I think we all know what the game plan is going to be. And then you've got that sort of as that EO versus XGI basically trade-off to make if you're going to sell one of them. For what it's worth, I think at the moment, it sounds incredibly cowardly. I probably would slate Bruno as being the safer sale. Like he's points dodging, but there's a case that you can say, well, you know what, for Mbeumo, if he is the man who's going to come in, or maybe it's another man, Foden, they're both, the fixtures are, the next fixture for Brentford is Crystal Palace at home. They were on this evidence tonight against Arsenal, took them quite well. They defended very well in the first half. And the matchups are very similar, and maybe for £2 million less, you'd be kind of less annoyed if Mbeumo messes. Because I guess, this isn't really, it's one of those where this is like, you're not removing a player because it's an enforced change. It's an elective change, like you're choosing to make that. So if you're not taking a hit, it's more kind of, there's a kind of this psychology behind it and trying to make yourself feel better about kind of reducing the risk, and you tell yourself all sorts of sort of stories about what could happen to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Bruno's possibly the safer sale in terms of effective ownership if you're going to gamify it. Rashford's the safer sale if they persist with him at the number 9.
It's a big if though, isn't it? Because it looks so poor that it seems almost inevitable that he would go back to the left. I think with Bruno as well, the final point, if I may, is even though he looks like he's due a return, those returns are heavily weighted towards assists rather than goals. Other than the odd penalty here or there, he is a player that is a creative force more than a goal threat week in, week out, generally. So whereas Rashford does look off the boil, if he's going to get anything, it's much more likely to be those goals. And the players that we're looking at bringing in, i.e. Mbeumo first up, much more heavily weighted towards goals than assists, which obviously for a midfielder is additionally valuable. So moving Bruno down to an Mbeumo or a Foden, for example, you're looking maybe not so much with Foden. He mixes it up a little bit between goals and assists a bit more, but Mbeumo certainly is much more of a goal threat than Bruno, and therefore the upside is potentially much higher, as we saw this weekend.
Oh, that's a good line, Sam. I think I'll be using that in the future. Yeah, I'm just selling an assist. I'm selling an assister for a goal scorer. Oh,
yeah, a penalty taking goal scorer as well. I know Bruno's on pens too, but anything to tell yourself.
I like it. I think Bumo's been watching Tony take pens, hasn't he? It's a
Yeah,
very similar sort of technique, isn't it?
they've been practicing them together.
Probably. Tony's not back in training until the 17th of September. He was saying on the Diary of a CEO podcast. But yeah, so Bumo, I think we should probably mention him for a second, well, for a little bit. He's leagues clear of. I know again 2 games in terms of XGI for this season thus far, with the 2 penalties. But the one thing I was surprised by is if you take that out and just look at non-pen XGI, he's actually 3rd. So he's doing particularly well. I think there was that big miss in the first game. Again, sample size in that first game when it got crossed over by Rico Henry, I think it was, and he side-fisted over the bar. But really good fixtures to come for him. Palace, Bournemouth, both home next, and Newcastle followed by Everton and Forest. So 4 good games in 5 as a wobbly United's fixtures harden after this Forest game. Analytics darling as well. So FPL Review seems obsessed with making me sell every player to get Mbumo in, and maybe I was a bit sort of I was lukewarm on him pre-season. Maybe, as I said in the first pod back after game week 1, if I'd had more time, he may have re-entered my thoughts. But as it was, we both shoved in Matoma last minute. But could this be the time to do it?
Yeah, so I think for me and my team, I don't have anything in the bank. So a Matoma to Mbuemo switch right now would be impossible. However, I'm personally looking at, if I don't get Mbuemo for one of the United boys this week, waiting for game week 3 to get out of the way and then selling Matoma for Mbuemo in combination with another downgrade elsewhere is a really tempting move, and one that I'm definitely eyeing up, because Brentford's fixtures, like you mentioned, are much better for much longer than Brighton's are. And you're selling a player, however good Matoma is, and he is absolutely fantastic, but you're buying a player that's on penalties, that is nailed into that side, and is now the attacking fulcrum of that side as well, with Tony out for the foreseeable. So yeah, Mbuemo is looking very tempting. His underlying data, even minus the penalties, like you mentioned, is looking really positive as well. It feels like it's one of those question marks that we're trying to figure out ways that it wouldn't make sense, but every route I look at, every angle I try to put it into, just proves again that he is actually a really good pick and good value at 6.6 million.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add is that you often have a very, very small window these days to get points from a player effectively until they suddenly become hugely owned. So say Bumo does do well against Palace, then suddenly everyone's buying him, and if you have a good week next week, and you're doing okay to start the season, you'll suddenly be looking at a dead asset like Almiron perhaps last year, or a player like Riyad Mahrez in seasons gone by who started well, everyone's lumped on, and suddenly you've just effectively got a dead asset in your team because everyone's owned the guy because he's done really well. I think Michael Antonio again is another example of that. Yeah. So getting in slightly early might make sense. If you started with him, you're obviously reaping the benefits of that. And I think that the more we've spoken about it, the more that, although I did pillory it a little bit on Twitter, that initial sort of reaction of thinking, maybe it is the case that I just move Bruno onto Bumo and suddenly I've got 2.5 million in the bank for game week 4 when the fixtures are more suited to making a few wholesale aggressive changes. Maybe that's the way to go at the moment. So yeah, I think there's a very strong pro template case here to be removing one of the Man United guys for Mbumo, that's for sure. I think that there's an interesting counterpoint there, though, on the contemplate side. There's 2 contemplates today. FPL says Mbumo or Foden to come in for one of the United guys. And Foden, I think, Sam, is you mentioned him to me the other day, just before the game, in fact. So he's not like a hot take, but he's been overlooked, hasn't he? Because Mbumo also got that brace, and everybody's now jumping in because he's done loads of points.
Yeah, Foden's giving me all the feelings at the moment. Every time he actually is starting consistently for City, he gets points. And especially in the role that he picked up over the weekend, he ran the show. He was absolutely phenomenal. I know Bernardo Silva is coming back and he's in training again soon, if not today. But Foden, the way he almost laid down that marker over the weekend against a really strong Newcastle side, he was so close to other points as well. It wasn't like that he got the assist and that was pretty much all he did all day. He was very close to other attacking returns, combined with Haaland really well. On another day, it could have been a mega haul. And we see that quite a lot with Foden when he operates in those central spaces. He doesn't get to do that often when KDB's in the side. So I'm always hesitant to look at Foden, even at the value of 7.5 million, which is really, really good. I'm hesitant when he plays out wide because I feel like he gets trapped out there a little bit too often for my liking. When he drifts into those central spaces, I just think he's such a canny operator. He's so good with his feet that he can make those chances with those deft touches out of almost nothing. And those are the sort of pockets of space that you need a creative asset like Foden in to unlock Haaland in those tighter games. So I really like Foden against the low block teams that are coming up against City in the next 4 or 5 game weeks. There are a lot of no offense to them, but weaker opposition that you would expect to back away from City and try and tighten up all of those spaces. Foden in those games could be really effective in those central areas. So as long as he holds down that spot and keeps getting those 90 minutes, which so far he is, maybe this is finally the season we see Foden like nail down that spot and become the asset that we all think he can be. Just Pep keeps getting in our way a little bit. So whether or not he's a better asset than Mbeumo on penalties and leading the side as that almost talismanic figure now is a question mark, especially for 1 million extra. But this is Man City. We're talking about a team that regularly get over 3xG. So, and he'll be serving Erling Haaland, the best striker in the world right now. So it's definitely a conversation. And I think Foden, I think he's around 10% ownership at the moment, is still a relative differential considering all of the very template picks a lot of us have. It could be a real conversation to have between Foden and Mbeumo.
Definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, those few fixtures, it's one of those where if City had started with more of a bang and there weren't so many great other assets lying around, we'd all be falling over ourselves to bring in City, wouldn't we? Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, West Ham away, Nottingham Forest home, Wolves away. Those are the next 5 fixtures. That is insane. Absolutely insane, especially if, as you said, Foden is nailed in that team. And given how threadbare City seem to be at the moment, you wouldn't really put it past them, especially the performance. You would put it past Pep, though, wouldn't you? I mean, you would find it very, very difficult to guess what Pep's going to do. I mean,
we all have trust issues.
He's a fantastic player, and then benches him. But Foden himself said after the game, a match of the day, he was enjoying playing inside rather than out wide, and he was hoping he could continue those performances. I think he was kind of saying, "I hope I can continue basically playing centrally." So, yeah, I mean, I wonder in some ways if we're overlooking it to some extent, and whether it kind of comes down to that sort of the points potential, really. And surely, if we're looking at that, even though Brentford did the double of Man City last season, we've got to be looking, if we're sizing up both of these players to come in, Mbeumo versus Foden, don't you side on the Man City player? Although, if he is playing the assister role, surely we look at the goal scorer in Mbeumo. Again, we're kind of back to kind of like, I'm not sure. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, I think at the moment, I would be tempted to give either a week. And just to say, if I was buying one right now, it would probably be Mbeumo. But that's only because I do have those trust issues with Foden. And even though there's like barely any other options that could play there, I could just see something crazy happening, like James McAtee or something, just coming into the side out of nowhere and operating in that role. Obviously going up against Sheffield United, who I believe he was out on loan to last season, and coming into that role and just owning it out of nowhere. So I would never put that past Pep and the way they structure their team. So I just have those trust issues. If I was forced into making a move now, it would probably be Mbeumo, just because I'm more confident that there's less that can go wrong there. But give me 1 or 2 more weeks of Foden starting regularly and looking electric, and I'd probably then swing the other way and start prioritizing Foden, despite the fact that he's less of a goal threat than Mbeumo. The amount of goals that City get probably outweighs the benefit of Mbeumo being that talismanic figure for a very good Brentford side, but they're no Man City.
I mean, there's a phased retreat option on the table, of course, from the Man United guys. So you sell one this week for Mbeumo, and you sell the next one next week for Foden if we're kind of feeling more confident. Oh, no, we should be confident, but we're feeling happy with Foden, especially because you said Fulham at home. That game is looking quite difficult for Fulham. And I don't know. You got United coming into decent fixtures again, game week 6, where they have Burnley, Palace, Brentford, Sheffield United. A nice run of 4 there. So maybe then you look again to buy players back for that run. But I guess that's the beauty of having such a leveled pricing landscape, isn't it? If we're flexible and just play the fixtures with these guys, it's not really the end of the world if you're kind of just playing fast and loose with the player you're going to bring in. So Mitchell Sterling asked us, how many 6.5 million midfielders should we have to hop on and hop off? Is it a case of having 1 or 2? And I think we may end up being a spot right now where it is 2, and you just kind of play thickly with it. I'm throwing Foden into that mix, but we will probably have Matoma as well. And if we did do the Rashford and Bruno phase withdrawal, you'd end up with Foden at 7.5, Matoma and Mbeumo both at 6.6. Maybe you want to get rid of Matoma as well. I don't know, because Newcastle game coming up. But maybe that's the way of kind of trying to exploit a level pricing structure at the moment, just to play the fixtures with these guys. And I don't know whether you have to size up on a case by case basis if you need to be ruthless with a player. So if it's just like, oh, he's doing well for me, but the fixture's stiffening, or whether you think, you know what, he's just going to keep returning no matter what. I think that could be a really interesting way of playing the next few weeks, because there are players like Bruno, like Maddison, if he is okay, Richarlison, if he does find his feet at Spurs, and also the Chelsea midfielders, if there is one that comes to the front of the pack, which are all worth considering because the fixture's so good. So, I mean, that could be a way to do it. Just a carousel of mid-price mids entering and leaving our teams.
Yeah, and I think if you play that system, and it looks quite likely that we're both going to end up down that route naturally, because there are just so many good options in that sort of price point. But playing that system, I think it's really important that you just keep that little bit of flexibility with money in the bank, because getting back to a 7.5 or an 8 million asset, of which there are a lot of really good looking players, when their fixtures turn positive again, will be quite important to do quickly. So the likes of a Rashford or a Bruno might not look too appealing now, or maybe even a Maddison at 7.5 as well might not be too appealing right now if he's injured, for instance. So you head straight down to Mbeumo. Just make sure you don't spend all of your money, meaning that you're locked out of moving it back up. If you're going to play that in and out sort of lottery every week, make sure you've got that flexibility that you can get back to the players you want to get to at the top of that price range, rather than just locking yourself into the lower end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings an interesting question, actually, because if you're trying to retain flexibility and trying to be nimble, when do you make these transfers? I mean, do you incur the potential price drops as, I guess, the less engaged managers do this too? I mean, we're not kind of advocating a reinvention of the wheel here. We're basically saying to do what most quote unquote casual managers will do. It's like, he scored loads of points and he's got a decent fixture coming up. I'm buying him. I'm selling the guy who's done nothing. And Man FPL asks, if your 2 transfers are fairly straightforward and clear, and making them today, if it meant you save 0.3 to 0.4, be preferable to waiting until Friday? I don't know. Maybe there is more of a case, especially early, when there's no midweek shenanigans to really worry you, no European competition, no cup competitions. You've only got kind of the remote possibility, and it is remote. I think we kind of bear in mind availability heuristic. We remember those easily retrievable memories. There are a few options in our heads when a player has got injured in training or something like that. I think it's Sadio Mane a few years back, but that doesn't really happen that often. So this is probably the best time of the season to take that chance, I think, Sam. Would you still be kind of waiting till Friday, especially bearing in mind that you are trading down? So it's absolutely fine to have that information, but having that sort of extra money in the bank and getting on those bandwagons so you get the extra 0.1, 0.2, could that be something which is beneficial going forward, just to kind of continue to fuel that flexibility?
So for me, and everyone plays the game differently, but for me personally, I just always think information is everything. So I like making my moves basically as last minute as I can before I start worrying about the servers going down. So maybe about half an hour before the deadline. And that's just the way I operate. Price changes are important. And I think if you're going to get locked out of a move that you are absolutely certain on, and that there aren't any midweek games for the players in question, then that's probably where I would bend and break my own rules there. But for me personally, I like having as much safety as I can, and knowing they've trained all week. There's been no reports of an injury or rotation or any leaks, which obviously we get every week now. None of that comes into the equation. I can just base my decision off of all of the data available to me, and I've waited as long as I can to compile all of that information. That's just the way I like to play. And even though I might miss out on that 0.2, maybe 0.3 swing if I'm unlucky, I personally don't mind as much about losing that additional team value, especially if you're trading down and you've got that time that you can take. If you want to take it, you're not going to be priced out of a move. It might mean later on in the season you're 0.1 short of another player at some point, but I think it's very rare that happens, and then there's no other alternative route to the player you want, or there's no alternative player that you can get to that isn't almost as beneficial to you. There's always another way to solve the puzzle later on in the season for the sake of that 0.1, 0.2. And it's quite a safe and secure way of playing, and I realize that that's quite risk management sort of level, quite extreme, but that's just the way I like to play it.
I mean, the only thing I would point out there is that it might actually be that money will start to play a role, depending on if you like Mo Salah, for example. So Liverpool from game week 5 to game week 12 don't play any teams in last year's top 6. A tricky assignment against Spurs in 7 and Brighton 8. But neither of those teams can defend either, and the rest of the teams are absolute peaches. The rest of those games, so maybe there will come a time when you want that extra flexibility, and you might need that extra 0.1 to fit everybody in. So that might be something that might make you think it's time now to just take that risk and kind of garner that extra 0.1 where you can, or fend off that 0.1 million value loss. Could be something worth bearing in mind, especially for you actually, because you've got 0.0. Might be something to think about, especially if you're kind of, hoping that in the future you're going to be able to, capitalize on good fixture runs for the more pricey players. I mean, it is only Salah really, which kind of creates that sort of conundrum for managers where we need to worry about how do we fit everything together. But yes, it's something worth thinking about. If I do see the prices are about to change this week, I think it will be mighty hard for me to avoid the temptation to not make the move. I think kind of to round off contemplate or pro template before we move on. So I think there's kind of another part of it, but I think this is the main sort of pro and con. It will be very difficult for me to. I think from our conversation, I am thinking that Bruno is the guy who will go. I know the XGI, but moving him for Mbumo, if the two of them, if there's that 0.2 swing situation developing over the next week or so, well, obviously over the next week, then that will be when I kind of start to think, I might get an itchy trigger finger then, Sam. I mean, are you swayed in any way, or are you, because you said you weren't entirely sure, and there's the striker question as well.
Yeah,
which we'll move on to.
Yeah, we'll definitely move on to the striker question next as well, because it all comes into the same question really of priorities for me. And Man United assets were always going to be or were meant to always be a hold for the first 3 game weeks, play them out there, and then I was going to make an assessment on whether I hold on to 2 of them, get rid of 1, or potentially even shift both. And I think trying to play by my own rules, giving these assets long enough to impress in my team is really important, especially when they are quality players, fundamentally, which they are. So giving them that chance against Nottingham Forest before moving them on when the fixtures turn a little bit less positive might be the way I end up looking at things. But I think if I had no other moves to make, Mbuemo in for Bruno or possibly Rashford, but I think I'd probably sway with you and go Bruno out as it stands, would be a really tempting move. I think because I've got 1 or 2 other moves elsewhere in my team that I'm tempted to make, And because I actually really like the look of getting rid of one of the Man United assets, and I'm not hyper confident which one I want to get rid of yet, leaving that move for next week when I know that I'm going to want to get rid of one, and I'll have one extra week's worth of information to make that decision with, I think is probably more tempting than shipping one this week and risking them going nuclear against Forest, which admittedly looks fairly unlikely right now, but it's only been 2 weeks and Man United are still a good side and these are good players we're talking about. So I wouldn't be surprised to see either of them get a pretty decent return next week. So I might be contemplate on this one, which I'm pretty 50-50, but just for the sake of balance, I think I'm contemplate.
It's a system change, isn't it? And if nobody's like us can see it, then fair play. And there's always the coward's move of moving a 4.0 over or doing some sort of spring cleaning with your team, which is something I've considered. I've considered selling Baldock to Gusto just to move some 4.0s and just leave it for another week, get more information. That could equally be the thing that I do. It's just I've got some questions, but I said if we can see that there's a slight system tweak needed at United, I'm sure ETH can as well.
Yeah.
Strikers then. So Nicholas Jackson is of interest to some. Luton at home this week. Underperformance at XGI so far, of course. Alex says he's looking to sell Watkins to Jackson this week. Watkins looks like Saka has also lost these, but Watkins has lost pens. Probably for the best, to be honest. He had a very patchy penalty record, to say the least. Great for my draft team as well. Douglas Luiz is on them, one of my draft picks. But Sam, you were steaming in on WhatsApp. I'm looking at selling Watkins. I just feel like you're a non-believer, Sam. Shun the non-believer is what I say.
You've been having a go at me all weekend for this. For any Ollie Watkins fanboys out there, I am on your side, I promise. I really like Ollie Watkins. I think he's a brilliant striker. Not being on penalties, there was a lot of conversation on Twitter, and it seemed to be the conversation was people saying that they've seen people thinking it was a good idea that he's not on, or better for him as an asset that he's not on penalties. I didn't see anyone actually saying that it was a better thing that he's off of penalties, because realistically it's probably not. But he hasn't got a great penalty record, so there is that variance that you probably could never be that confident on captaining Watkins, because there is the off chance of negative returns as well as positive returns as well. So you are that little bit more fearful. But as it is, 2 assists in 2 games so far, Ollie Watkins is still doing pretty well. He's got one more good fixture of the opening 3 remaining, which is Burnley next week. It is unfortunate, and it's something I didn't really consider, but Burnley not having a fixture in game week 2 has thrown me a little bit, and not being able to see how they hold up against less of a Man City. It has been quite difficult to process in my mind as to whether or not Burnley are a team that we can target, or because they did look really impressive against Man City, although obviously they conceded a fair few goals. It was basically the Erling Haaland show yet again. So how much can we read into that? Not really sure. So Ollie Watkins for me isn't like a desperate sell by any means, because he will tick along in any given game week. Yes, he's off pens, but the chances are still flowing to him, and he was unlucky not to return more than he has done in the opening 2 game weeks. But Nicholas Jackson, despite the fact that he hasn't gotten any returns yet, I've actually still been pretty impressed with the way he's performed. He's led the line comfortably enough. I don't think many people were expecting him to be the center focal point for Chelsea so quickly. But I think considering he's still a young player, he's only had 30 or 40 starts in his career, I think he's done a pretty decent job. He looks really quick. He gets in behind well, and he links up play pretty well as well. So because it's Luton, I could be tempted. I think there are other players that have crept into my thinking though now, based on the weekend's performance. Wissa, if I'm not getting Mbeumo this week, Wissa could be a really good option at 6.1. Again, he looks just as likely to get those points as Mbeumo is. Yes, he's off of penalties, but let's not all tell ourselves we're expecting 38 penalties a season from Brentford. And then also Julian Alvarez as well at 6.5 for City. Again, if you're not looking at Foden, maybe Alvarez is for you, and he does look more of a goal threat than Foden. He'll always play second fiddle to Haaland, but again, at 6.5 million, he's less than half the price of him. So I'd be more than happy having both in my side. And if I'm getting half the returns from Alvarez, I'm still fairly comfortable with that. So there are other players creeping into my mind in that forward role. But I don't think Watkins is an easy sell by any means. It's just looking at our teams this week. It looks, as we'll get into later on, there's not many teams out there that will have a bad looking game week 3 side. And a lot of us have 2 transfers. So it's, can we be aggressive with that one move and then save 2 for next week when there are some more fixtures to target? Watkins could be one of those options that you might fancy your chances in punting on an upgrade somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's one of those guys who managers who has got 2 United players. I think removing one of them feels more sort of cautious than removing Watkins, to me at least. I mean, again, it's all eye testy stuff, and I know I've cited stats, but again, 2 weeks. But Watkins' first game against Newcastle could have got a goal and 2 assists. Last game, the penalty when he got taken out, I mean, he flicks it over Pickford's, and another day he gets a bit more power on that and he scores. Had a good chance again. I think it was in the second half as well when he just hit it wide. And again, if he'd have scored a goal in either of those games, then this wouldn't be a question, I don't think, as much. And I'm sorry, but Nick Jackson just feels like he's finding his feet to me a little bit at the moment. I know he's leading the line well, he's getting in good positions, but it's not the case that he's shown the instinct for finishing those chances in the league thus far. But it is Luton next, so I can completely appreciate if you're just sitting on Rashford, for example, and you're kind of thinking, well, I've always fancied Chelsea from game week 3, and as part of my plan to be going there, I assume a lot of people now probably have Chilwell at least. So if you had like Reece James or you had Gabriel, maybe you've made that switch already, and you want to double down on Chelsea ahead of a really good fixture run. No bones about it; it's a really good fixture one. They are not quite there for me as a team. I'm happy to have Chilwell, despite that he got substituted at 60th minute. But I'm happy to have him. I'm just not sure at the moment whether I want. I know. It's one of those where they just look a bit too like strangers at the moment, shockingly, because all they've done is just buy loads of random players.
Which is weird because I thought they looked really cohesive and like a team with a plan against Liverpool, but maybe that's because they focus so much on setting up to mitigate against Liverpool that actually it wasn't so much a system moving forward, but it was just a game plan for that match. So, yeah, I still don't think they looked too bad against West Ham. I think there were promising signs, but you're right. They looked like a team that were just getting to know each other a little bit. When Mudryk came on, Chilwell obviously came off around just after 60 minutes because it looked like they were just getting in each other's way. So I think that's a really good example of a team that haven't quite figured out everyone's personalities and traits yet. One thing that did come to my mind, though, when you were talking about not really having faith in moving Watkins for Jackson, if you're looking at getting rid of one of the Man United boys, there is a 7 million asset at Chelsea that looked rather promising in midfield. And if you like a flair pick, may I offer Raheem Sterling?
Yeah, Raheem the Dream. Very good. A couple of really good runs, using that low center of gravity and those Velociraptor arms. It's again one that I need to see more of. I'm not. It's one of those where we both kind of collared him at the start of the season as being like the biggest price drop and therefore potentially being kind of a value pick. I think it's one where I'm going to need to see a little bit more from him, and cue a brace against Luton, something that we're all falling over ourselves to bring him in for the run coming up. I mean, it is. I think they're always going to be a stalking horse, Chelsea, over the next few 2 home games: Luton, Nottingham Forest, and Bournemouth away, Villa at home, Fulham and Burnley away. I mean, none of those games between 3 and 8 worry me in terms of owning a Chelsea attacker. No Europe to worry about, as we know. I can see why people are going there at the moment. And it kind of feels like removing a United player for a Brentford player I mean, nice to have a good fixture. Brentford have a good fixture. So it was a bit kind of like a bit crabby, you're just kind of shuffling along. Whereas if you are bringing a Chelsea player for a player who is kind of the fixture hardening, or if you've got money, you've started money in the bank, for example, and you've got João Pedro there, then of course you just move straight to Jackson. It certainly makes a lot of sense. In our situation, it kind of does. For me, it doesn't make that much sense. For you, it makes it a bit more, perhaps. I think what's really interesting, actually, if you zoom out for a minute, is that there are quite a few different team configurations going around. And last year, what I hated was that we all basically end up in the same situation with the same team. And what we're going to do, we're all making the same moves. Whereas now there is kind of this sense of difference in what people are doing. I think that's really fascinating, especially if you end up on the right side of it, it's great. And it's about getting it right and kind of exercising that caution and at the right time, because I've cited a few stats, and we've both kind of mentioned as well a few elements of the eye test, but that all kind of leads me back to this sort of horrible question, which is gnawing away at me, even when we were talking about Bruno to Mbumo, or Rashford to Mbumo, Watkins to Jackson, a Foden perhaps coming in. There's been 2 weeks, Sam. I mean, can we have possibly seen enough after 2 weeks? I've said this on long-term listeners will know. I've said this so many times. Like, if I work in strategy and insight. If I went to a meeting and I said that something was true after using 2 data points, I'd be laughed out of the room. But here we are making assertions, or at least trying to make decisions off 2 data points. Like, obviously, we're not multinational, multi-million, billion-dollar corporations, but it's still something worth bearing in mind, isn't it? The principle of that. I mean, can we have possibly seen enough after 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think that takes me back to what I was saying about both Bruno and Rashford. Like, we've got 2 weeks of this season, but on a lot of players and a lot of teams, we've got more than that, because we can look back to last season, we can look back to historic performances even further back than that, especially in the cases of Bruno and Rashford. We know them to be quality players. Nothing's fundamentally changed in the last 2 game weeks to make them no good at football anymore. They might be getting off to a bit of a rough start, and there are data points we can take from that. There are bits of information that we can glean and try to inform our decisions there. But it's, do we prioritize what we've learned in those 2 weeks versus what we know about these players over several years? The other thing to monitor as well is, okay, Mbuemo's off to a great start. Well, what do we know about him historically? Well, actually, what we know about him historically is also really positive, because we saw the back end of last season when Tony was out, he actually performed really well. And even before Tony was out, we're still looking at a 150-point midfield asset. And I think he was classified as a forward even last season. To be honest, he never really came into my thinking, so I never really checked. But he was a player getting plenty of points. If you look at his returns since he came to the Premier League, it's a player that consistently does get goals and assists. So we do have that confidence that will continue. It's not like a Nicholas Jackson, where he's fresh to the league. We've never seen him in this league before. We haven't seen him in this system before. It's a new team altogether around him as well, with a new coach. So all of the data we've got to go on is these 2 game weeks. Whereas with other players, Foden we're looking at, and Mbuemo we're looking at, these are players that we've got a lot more information to lean back on and inform our decisions. Even though it's only 2 game weeks of this season, we've actually got a lot more historically to lean back on as well.
Yeah, we've got confidence that this player, we purchased them, they're going to. There's a decent enough chance, whether you can put metric on that or not, there's decent enough chance, due to their pedigree, track record, that they're going to come into our teams and be effective for us. And it comes back to that kind of elective versus enforce change difference that I mentioned earlier on, that I'm always much more comfortable if a player gets injured, I take him out, because there's no sort of blowback possibility against me. It's always going to be a net positive. Whereas in these situations, yes, I spent nothing to remove the player, but there's still a chance that you end up with a horrible situation where you remove the guy, Bruno, if I say remove Bruno for Bumo misses a penalty or doesn't do blanks, and then Bruno gets like a penalty, gets an assist, and suddenly I just feel I don't care about like an idiot on social media, but I feel like really annoyed that I've made that move. So do we turtle completely? And kind of go, you know what, right, I'm going to take that sort of 4.0, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, as Anthony loved to say, and just kind of do a Baldock to a Gusto, or, you know, remove Mbama for Oshula at Sheffield United. Is that something that you do just to kind of see it out? It's difficult. It really is difficult, and I think I need to locate some conviction about this in terms of how I kind of move forward. I do think just to round off this before we move on to bold claims, it's going to be mighty tempting to not remove. I'll be very tempted by moving Bruno to Bumo. Yeah, but we shall see where I'm at by Friday. I think it's almost like if I miss that sort of boat on Tuesday night or Wednesday night, whenever the prices are going to change, almost definitely for Bumo, he'll probably will go up again. Don't know if Bruno's going to go down, but if I haven't made the move by Tuesday or Wednesday, then I feel like by the time we get to Friday, I'd have called on it a little bit. And this kind of, you know, it's whether that kind of thought process is clear enough. But that's the beauty of doing a pod like this, because we can talk through the positives and negatives and see where we're at. And at the moment, I'm kind of fairly kind of 70-30 happy to do the move. We'll see where we get to later on. Should we do bold claims, Sam?
Let's do it. Let's move on to bold claims, and fingers crossed this week we actually get off the mark. So why don't you run us through the bold claims from last week to refresh our minds as to where we went wrong last week?
Well, so we had Rashford slamming in a brace against Spurs.
That worked out well.
That was your one. Yeah, that was obviously excellent. My one was that Gabriel scores against Crystal Palace. It is now the 97th minute, and he has not done so. He has come on. He came on for Martinelli. So yeah, that's brilliant. And he has not done so. And the listener claim was that Newcastle beat City in some way, shape, or form, and that didn't happen either. So yes, 2 weeks of consecutive strikeouts, Sam, and maybe, as we said, we are going to kind of start to home in on saying something like, "Oh, yeah,
Haaland to score.
Haaland scores an overhead kick," or something like that. That's full time 1-0 Arsenal. So there you go.
Full time. Okay, nice. Well, we'll have a look at our final game week score in a second. In the meantime, I think I'm first up. So Arsenal obviously won today. That's 2 wins on the bounce for them. They're going up against Fulham at home next weekend, and Fulham at the moment look a little bit at 6s and 7s. So I'm going with Arsenal to have a bit of a rout against Fulham. 5+ goals is my claim for this week. It doesn't look the best claim right now, considering Arsenal just snuck to a 1-0 win against Palace. But Fulham look really shaky at the back. They look like a team very much in flux right now. I don't know whether Paulinho is back yet. I'm not entirely sure. But Fulham are shipping XG for fun right now. So I think Arsenal are going to have some fun at home to them.
Right. Well, I mean, I've gone slightly differently. I think we've got to kind of go big. Go big. So in my draft team, I happen to have the legend who is Carlton Morris at Luton, decent last year in the Championship, and I still think that Chelsea are still going to be a bit disorganised. So I've got Carlton Morris scoring versus Chelsea, be it an ice cold penalty, be it some sort of screamer, something like that. But I've got a sneaky suspicion there won't be a clean sheet there. I mean, I'm a Chilwell owner, so I'm happy if a clean sheet happens. But I've just got a suspicion that even if Chelsea do win, which I expect them to, I expect them to win kind of 3-1. And that's what we're doing in my prediction league, Jeff. But yes, Morris scoring versus Chelsea. I like Morris. I think he's looking at his FBref data, very good player, and he's very good in the playoff final. So yes, that's my prediction. Talisman to come through for Luton.
Nice. Well, I actually was saying to you earlier when you posted this through to me, I quite like our predictions this week. I think there's a good chance that one of us will get off the board. Fingers crossed both of us do. And as always, we haven't put out the question for bold claims to the listeners yet. But after the show, we'll post out, I think tomorrow around lunchtime, just saying, what are your bold claims for the week? So please do message us on Twitter, or X as it's now known, at WGTA_FPL to let us know what your bold claims are for the week. And we'll post who we decide to be the boldest of claims ahead of Game Week 3 on our Twitter account before the deadline.
Yep, nice one. Okay, so on to listener questions. Just coming up to 55 minutes, which is good timing. Oh, Saliba has got 8 points from that. Arsenal have just finished. So yeah, 52 all out, Sam, which is not terrible, not great, but hitting the 50
looks
points.
Like a live rank of 418k, so a bit of a red for both of us, I think, this week. But yeah, fairly happy with the start.
Yeah, it's one that if you got 2 more points, or 3 or 4 more points, you do got green. So yeah, it's fine at the start of the season. Cool. All right, those questions then. First question, we've also answered a few of them already. Next one, first one, Seeking Duzam, are Diaz and et al. Showing that Salah is overpriced? So Diaz scored against Bournemouth and could have had a tap in had Jota squared it earlier on. Later on, Jota himself scored 2. Salah, interesting one. FPL Oakwell has commented on our on my kind of usual kind of here's my beer and here's us recording thread, and that he wants us to talk about the fact that people worrying about Salah all week. Maybe it was a bit of a waste of time, but yeah, still beat Haaland by 6 points. So it's not too bad. Assuming you captain Salah, of course. So yeah, not too bad. I mean, does it kind of underline that Salah's overpriced? I mean, Diaz in particular, like 2 weeks, of course, but he's looked very, very good, hasn't he?
He has looked good. I think with Diaz, I started with him last season, actually, because...
So did I, yeah.
Yeah, he was very popular. I think he was 8 million last season, so even cheaper this year. I think the problem with Diaz for me is not so much even the fixtures. It's just I don't know week in, week out that he's going to be starting. Like, there are options down that left wing, and Darwin at the moment isn't in favour, but at some point he will be a factor. And then also Jota can play out there as well. Gakpo's been known to play out there. So I'm just... At the moment, I think I need, a bit like what I was saying with Foden earlier in the pod, I think I'd need more of a case study in Diaz before I have confidence that week in, week out, he's going to be the starter in the Prem for Liverpool down that left flank. If he is, he's a very selfish player and he will chew up those chances for Liverpool. So actually having him on the pitch feels like it actually comes at the detriment of Mo Salah. So if they're both in the starting 11... at 7.5 million, I'd actually quite like having Diaz over Salah for that saving of 5 million because he is such a selfish player. But I just don't quite have that confidence that this is maintainable over weeks and weeks and weeks. And when there are so many other good picks around that price point, at the moment, I don't quite have enough confidence to go there as of yet.
I suppose though that yes, you're paying for Salah for the security, aren't you? But then again, the price difference is simply incredible, really, when you think about it. Like, you're paying, was it 5 million for security?
Yeah,
that's a lot of stuff that you could otherwise be doing. And maybe it would be the case that by the time, and I mentioned earlier on, Liverpool's really good fixtures coming up in game week 5 onwards, hoping that by the time we get to game week 5, then we'll have a better idea of who is going to be the person to back, and then maybe it would be the case of just going with them. I mean, even if Diaz did play 60 minutes and you saw sort of Darwin eroding his minutes, if he's able to keep up momentum, same for Jota, then I think you'd probably be okay there, won't you, really?
Yeah, I mean, they're attacking enough side that they'll be getting 2 or 3 XG by the time he comes off the pitch if he starts. And even if he doesn't, then you'll get 30 minutes at the end most weeks. That's just the way that Klopp likes to operate. So, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the upside there. But I think at 60, if they're getting regularly 60 to 70 minutes a week, I think I can probably find value elsewhere. But yeah, around game week 5 or 6, when the fixtures do turn positive, if he's been locked into that starting 11 and is on fire at that point, then it's a completely different decision, and we can approach it with a lot more confidence, thinking that he might be in the first 11 week in, week out.
Like, is Salah then overpriced? Becomes the question. Like, is 5 million worth the guarantor of stars?
Is he on penalties?
I think,
what do you reckon?
I'm sure he is. I mean, I don't think that's a question. He's a star player. I'm not sure that we're going to see that change.
Okay.
I don't know. Is the question at the moment? Is the point at the moment? I think we need to get a bit further onto the season. Hopefully by game week 5, game week 6, we have more of an indication of how well Salah has done and whether he is justifying that price tag. Because he, of course, he has historically. It's just because of the array of options available. 4 million less than he is. It begins to be a really active question, whereas it wasn't really that way in the past. Yeah. Next question, a short one actually. Is Douglas Luiz actually a decent option right now on penalties? Says Amund at FPL Nordic Magpie. Yeah, I think that I'm not going to do the FPL thing of saying he is an option. Of course, he is an option. Last year, 142 points last year though. 6 goals, 7 assists, and on penalties potentially now.
I think he outscored Pereira last season. I'm pretty sure I saw that in my preseason research. He was he either matched him or just marginally outscored him, which I was really surprised with.
He outscored him, yeah. So 148 points is 142 points. Sorry, is really healthy. It's just whether there's a space in the squad for a player like that. There's
too many good midfielders elsewhere. That's the thing, I think.
That's exactly what it comes down to. Next question. Amber Redmond asks who they transfer out for Reece James. So still hanging on to Reece James, unfortunately, for Amber. They've already got Chilwell, Onana, Estu, and are not keen on double ups. So where do you go here? I mean, who's basically, I think the question effectively boils down to who is the third kind of template in inverted commas defender. Is it no mention of Saliba there? So maybe it would become the case of covering your backside. If you don't own him against Fulham, I know Arsenal have got United in 4, but still commendable rearguard action tonight by the looks of things. Obviously, I haven't seen the games I've been recording. Decent. It's kind of a bit of a patchy fixture run though. I mean, any other suggestions there, Sam?
Yeah, so they're not keen on double ups by the looks of it. So Chilwell, Onana, Estu, Kabor. So there are a few options that I'd recommend. If you're looking at saving $1 million, then I'd have a look at Udogie, who I've been really impressed with so far. Gets forward, Spurs looking decent. The wing backs are getting forward and look like they're getting into attacking position. So like the look of him at 4.5. Another one, Rico Henry, as well. As we mentioned with Mbeumo, Brentford have some great fixtures coming up as well. And Henry is known to get forward a little bit as well. So there might be the odd attacking return. I think he consistently gets 3 or 4 a season. So you might luck out and get one out of him. And then the final one, if you've got any sort of confidence after 2 weeks, it's hard to, but if you've got any sort of confidence, the Man City asset that I'd probably look at right now is Gvardiol and hope that he continues to start. At 5 million, he could be really good value for money if he does become nailed into that City backline. And obviously, he is a very talented player, and there's no reason to think that he wouldn't be in their preferred starting 11. It's just a matter of whether or not he's ready to regularly hold down that spot at the moment. But yeah, those are the 3 options I'd probably float. Are any of them capturing your imagination?
Yeah, I think we can bring in the next question by Jeff Pedder here, actually. He said, are we sleeping on City's defence with those fixtures? He actually started with Gvardiol and he's now considering a double up. And I think that would be where I'd go. I think with Stones out into the international break, you'd be seeing one of them. You'd be seeing less competition, and you probably see one of them come to the fore. I think probably would be Ake for me. For something in my mind marks him out as the main kind of goal threat from set pieces, especially now Laporte's off to Saudi Arabia, as Laporte was always that guy. I think that definitely. If you didn't own Edison at the start of the season, certainly in a situation now where we've got an overlooked defence who have got very good fixtures coming up. And lots of very nice kind of unique points there. In fact, it was one of those I was looking at it earlier on and thinking, well, I've got no way to move a player on to one of them, except maybe next week. And maybe next week, if I kind of did think I'm worried about Estepinian, despite the fact that obviously you get the attacking returns, if I'm worried about him, then maybe he becomes a City defender. I think that kind of be where I go now. Because you obviously the Arsenal against Fulham, you get kind of 1 week payoff, but the fixtures are quite mixed. Whereas with City, if you can kind of luck into Ake, Akanji, Guardiola playing all of the games coming up, then you're going to be looking pretty good. So I think I'd probably give that a go potentially. Yeah. But I do like the Rico Henry call. Brentford good fixtures, and he's doing something of every game so far, which means very little. But that assist threat was always there. I've owned Rico Henry for the last couple of seasons at some point. And he's always just kind of flattered to deceive. So I'm sure if it comes around to it this year and I buy him, then he'll do the same. But at the moment, he's doing very well, and he's becoming more of a potent weapon in Brentford's Arsenal. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely options out there. That's for sure. I probably would be less interested in Udogie or maybe Pedro Porro. Only started one, but last week he was on the bench. I would be less interested in Udogie, who's played very well. It's just that I've got less sort of confidence in my Spurs defense keeping clean sheets than I do with the other two. Maybe some attacking returns on the way. But yeah, for me, Amber, I think it probably would be that I just kind of lump it on a City player for the time being and see how it goes. And Jeff, double up, sure. I mean, that's really decent. If I for whatever reason was wildcarding this week, I'd almost definitely be looking at Edison and a City defender.
So, do you want to lock yourself out of Foden though?
Yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, Foden, you've got the ifs and buts for assist defenders.
True.
You've got the ifs and buts.
Yeah, unless you've got Edison.
What am I talking about? Yeah. So we shall see. Right. Charlie H. Ask me a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you both enjoy Gabriel's double-digit haul versus Palace? Well,
very much so. It was great.
Sorry, Charlie. I mean, I was hoping that my bold claim would come through, but it's not happened, and sadly, Gabriel has not played. There are some reports linking him with Saudi Arabia, but I mean, I have to see what happens there. Final question, Adam Pritchard, 35 who. Does this weekend show that we can make more calculated capacity risks due to the fact that the differences were so marginal between Salah and EBH? I think that's. I don't know. I think this week was always the week where Salah was going to have some decent EO when it came to captaincy. Past this point, I mentioned the fixture already for City. It's going to be Haaland all the way up to when Arsenal and City play each other in Gameweek 8. There's no question about that. This week was a good time where you could have gained something from captaining Haaland, so it was regretful that he missed. There were a couple of decent chances, I think, at least I counted or remember in the Newcastle game. But from here onwards, it's basically about the impactful 10, not about Haaland anymore, because Haaland's going to be your captain. Everyone's playing a game of 10 now, and that's just, I think, the way it is, and we've got to just kind of accept that. I wouldn't be kind of taking that on really across any of those fixtures that we're seeing. And fair enough if you do, and fair enough if it goes well, but the odds aren't in your favour. And I just wouldn't try to be too clever about this, because it could be season over, frankly, if he does go off one of these games you haven't captained him, because everybody else would have.
Yeah, even against a really fantastic Newcastle defence, he looked pretty likely to score. And even though they were half chances, they nearly snuck in. So, yeah, he looks potent as ever. And even though this week, technically, the Salah owners have won out, it was a penalty that Salah got in the first place. But other than that, he didn't really have a lot to go on. And Haaland, in a quiet game, was fairly unlucky not to get returns against a much more difficult opposition. So, yeah, I think for the foreseeable, it's Haaland for me until something catastrophic happens. So yeah, I'm on your side with this one. I think Haaland's probably the go-to for the time being.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I know those people like the randomness of captaincy. I don't, because I just find it really annoying that you get the 50-50s. Those 50-50s, long-term distance below, I end up on the wrong side of them the vast majority of the time. And I'm happy that the 50-50s are now going to be constrained to, do I sell Bruno? Yeah, do I sell Rashford? I mean, that's okay. I can deal with that. It's not necessarily game week ending, but getting the captaincy wrong kind of can be, and it can be sort of, it can set you back 3 or 4 weeks if you get the captaincy wrong. So it's nice to have that sort of burden removed from me for a little while at least. So we get this game week 8. We'll see whether it depends on how Arsenal are doing, how City are doing, whether we kind of look at that. But that's a question for future Tom and future Sam, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
They'll know what to do.
Transfers and captains.
Let's do it. Your team's first, but to be honest, we're both effectively on the same team pretty much. So we can probably discuss it together. Yep. Is there anything particularly on your mind outside of what you mentioned earlier, which I believe was Bruno you're looking at to Mbeumo?
Yep. Nope, not at all. I haven't really thought about removing Watkins, and I think that it's probably easier for me mentally to just kind of just take that off the table. But yeah, very much on the table is Bruno, Rashford's. Which one do I get rid of? And I think that I'm leaning towards removing Bruno just because the EO sort of question is probably lesser for him versus Rashford. And also, as you astutely said, you're removing an assister for a goal scorer if you do get Mbeumo in. I think I've had so many years of bandwagons just passing me by. I think I did look at the past few years when I've looked at kind of making a change in game week 3, and I actually haven't done the 2 free transfers when you get to game week 3 for actually many years now. I've only ever taken one move and kind of have kept it rolling. But the last few years I have done that, and it's gone okay because I've been fairly cautious about it. Last year I was fairly cautious about it. So I think that I might do that because you've still got Rashford, you've still got that sort of attacking coverage because you're assuming that Bruno assists, Rashford scores almost, so you're probably okay with that. Plus, you're kind of getting on that bandwagon and kind of making the most of that sort of Overton window of of Mbeumo and being to some extent FPL relevant. In 2 weeks, will he be FPL relevant after 2 home fixtures? I don't know. But Palace did defend well by the sounds of it the second half. So it might not be as cut and dry as we think. We might see a blank. There's always the kind of the little voice in my head saying, just remove Baldock for Gusto and leave it be. But I'll need to see. I think as I said earlier on, the key sort of crux of all of this will be when the prices are looking like they're going to move either way. Probably the Bruno drop will be the one that I'll be thinking about if we do get there, of course. If Rashford does kind of come close to a drop, I'm probably going to be less convinced now we've spoken. Before I was thinking, I probably would sell Rashford. Now I'm kind of much less convinced because I think you've made some good points about him. But if Bruno does look like he's going to go down to 8.4, even if I've let an Mbeumo rise happen, that might be the one where I kind of look at it and think, okay. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how impactful 0.1 million drops actually going to be because I'm always going downwards. But there's something in my head about making sure that I kind of stop the bleed if possible. Because say Bruno blanks this week again, and then Mbeumo shoots again, then I end up with another sort of counter from the next deadline on Friday night, where I'm kind of thinking, well, I've got to wait again until Monday, and then I could by then be 0.2, 0.3 down. So that's just a situation, a scenario I want to sort of avoid. Whereas you're a lot more kind of cautious, aren't you?
I am, and to be fair, the points that you've made in this pod have made me slightly more interested in manoeuvring Fernandes out for Mbeumo. I think the important thing that I'm going to keep coming back to during the week is am I going to be getting rid of Bruno next week anyway? Like, is there anything that he can do on the pitch against Forest that is going to make me convince me to keep him beyond game week 3? And I'm not, as it stands, I'm not sure there really is. I think having 2 United at the moment seems like possibly overkill. And even though it's a good fixture this week, maybe it seems almost inevitable that I would get rid of one. I think the other thing to consider as well is if Bruno's getting returns, it probably means it's because Rashford's the one finishing the chances. So you're still covering off quite a lot of those points by having Rashford in the team anyway, or at least giving yourself the best chance to. Mm-hmm. So I don't mind moving Fernandes out so much. I don't want to be too laissez-faire with my transfers, though. I don't want to jump the gun early, and I will be monitoring my mindset, because I always thought Fernandes and Rashford will stay in my team until game week 3. Then I'll make a rational decision after that. Watkins to a Jackson is the other move I could make. Yeah, I don't know. I think Watkins as well is probably treading water a little bit in my team. I think it is inevitable I will get rid of him in 1 or 2 game weeks time. So it's whether or not I want to jump now. I think there are better value players. I know you hate me right now. There are better value players potentially out there that are 6 million, 7 million with great fixtures coming, and Watkins fixtures just aren't quite that positive after the Burnley game. Whether or not I do it this week is a different matter, but I think one of those two will probably go this week, just so I don't leave myself with 3 moves that I want to make next week and only 2 transfers to do it with. If I'll put it on my team really quickly for anyone watching on YouTube, I've got a doggy rather than the second 4.0 defender, so I can't really maneuver to Gusto unless I get rid of Cabor, and I'm fairly comfortable having Cabor there for the time being. So I don't think that's an option I'll be pursuing myself. It'll probably be 1 change to my starting 11, either Watkins or Bruno out, or, because to be fair, we haven't been watching the Arsenal game, do we know that Martinelli or Saka aren't injured or something's gone on there? So I'll check that out before making a decision. But yeah, as it stands, it will probably be one of those 2 moves.
Cool. Well, here we go. I think we were all done for this week, aren't we, Sam? Really interesting discussion. I feel like it's pushed me in a particular direction. I came into it open-minded, and here I am now watching the Mbumo and Bruno prices. It looks like actually Mbumo may rise tonight.
Oh no! How many beers have you had during this pod? Are you drunk enough to make that move now, or are you going to wait?
It's not. I've had 2, I think. Yeah. So
not enough. So all good. Well, we will obviously let you know what our moves are closer to the end of the week. If you do go and check us out on Twitter, or X as it's now known. But yeah, I'll go through the details of where you can find us in just a second. We were Who Got the Assist. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you could follow us on the socials, which are Twitter or X at WGTA_FPL, or FPL Pricey for me personally, on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL, or again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there as well. And then also, if you could give us a 5-star rating on wherever you're listening to the pod, that would be really, really appreciated, really helpful to get it out to as many FPL managers as possible. So whether that's Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening, that would be fantastic. And if you've been tuning in on YouTube, which I know quite a few of you are these days, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, it just helps us get out there. The algorithm is really tough on YouTube, so the more likes and subs we can get, the better.
Thanks, Sam. Well, we hope we assist you this week. Let's see if we do jump on those bandwagons or not. We'll speak to you next week. Sayonara.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?